Estoy aquí. No, 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 no. Aquí. Is the spotlight being operated by clowns today? That's better. Today, the topic that will be covered is the passive voice. There are actually two voices. The active voice, which is called la voz activa in Spanish, and the passive voice, which is called la voz pasiva. Let's first take a quick look at the active voice. In the active voice, a person or thing called the agent performs an action on an object called the recipient. The active voice highlights the agent by making it the subject of the sentence. Statements in the active voice usually follow the pattern agent plus verb plus recipient. Watch.
Los senadores discutieron el proyecto de ley.
Here's another example.
El presidente ha nombrado a los miembros del comité.
Now, in the passive voice, the recipient of the action, in other words, the person or thing acted upon, becomes the subject of the sentence. In that way, the passive voice highlights the recipient by making it the subject of the sentence. Statements in the passive voice usually follow the pattern recipient plus ser and a past participle plus por and the agent. Watch again.
El proyecto de ley fue discutido por los senadores.
And here's one more example.
Los miembros del comité han sido nombrados por el presidente.
Atención! The agent, or the person performing the action, is not always explicit in a sentence with the passive voice. Look at this next example.
La ciudad fue fundada en 1883.
Did you notice that por and the agent are missing? We know the city was founded, but we don't know by whom. Now, note that singular forms of ser, such as es, ha sido, and fue, are used with singular subjects. Plural forms, such as son, han sido, and fueron, are used with plural subjects. Observe.
La manifestación fue organizada por un grupo de activistas. Los dos candidatos fueron rechazados por el comité.
By now, you've probably also noticed that the past participle must agree in number and gender with the subject, like this.
El discurso fue escrito por el presidente mismo. Dos tratados han sido firmados por la primera ministra.
And just a couple more examples and we're done.
3 nuevas leyes serán aprobadas por el Senado este año. La disminución de empleos fue prevista por el ministro de Economía.
¿Soy yo en la pintura? ¡Ay, creo que sí! Mi retrato fue pintado por Salvador Dalí. ¡Ay, qué tremendo honor! ¡Hola! Buenos días. Sorry about that. No se debe hablar con la boca llena. Which reminds me, let's talk about the uses of se. First, let me tell you about the impersonal se. We use it with third-person singular verbs when the subject of the sentence is indefinite. In English, we sometimes use the words one, people, you, or they to express the same idea. The impersonal se can be used with verbs that function intransitively. What is an intransitive verb, you ask? It's simply one that does not or cannot take a direct object. Let me show you what I mean.
Se estudia mucho en esa escuela. Se habla mucho de la crisis.
The impersonal se can also be used with transitive verbs. That is, verbs that take a direct object, when the direct object is a specific person or specific people. In this case, you need to add the personal a, and the verb is always singular. Take a look.
En las elecciones pasadas, se eligió al alcalde casi por unanimidad. Se eligió a los ganadores del concurso.
Next, I'll talk about the passive se. In Spanish, the reflexive pronoun se can be used instead of the passive voice when the person performing the action isn't stated. The third person singular verb form is used with singular nouns, and the third person plural form is used with plural nouns.
Se ve el monumento desde la catedral. Se necesitan más policías en Madrid.
Atención, the passive se is only used with transitive verbs, that is, verbs that can take a direct object in the active voice. Did you notice that the passive se is used to refer to an indefinite person or people? Take a look at this sentence. An accountant is wanted, but we don't know who wants an accountant. Look again.
Se busca contadora. Se aprobaron 2 propuestas de ley.
The passive se is often used on signs and warnings. Watch.
Se buscan camareros con experiencia. Se prohíbe cruzar.
Ahora, ¿se puede pasar al próximo tema? I'd like to show you how to use se to express unexpected events. Se can be used to describe accidental or unplanned occurrences. The person who performs the action is de-emphasized, implying that he or she is not directly responsible. Here's an example.
Se me perdió el reloj.
The speaker lost his watch, but not on purpose, obviously. It was an accident. Here are some verbs that are frequently used with se to describe unplanned events.
Acabar, caer, dañar, lastimar. Olvidar, perder, quedar, romper.
Now, here are a couple of examples of how they're used in a sentence.
Se nos quedaron las bolsas en la tienda. Se me rompió el celular.
In this type of statement, the person to whom the event happened is treated as an indirect object. What would in English be the direct object of the sentence becomes the subject. Observe closely.
Se me acabó el dinero. Se te cayeron las gafas. Se le rompió la taza.
And a few more.
Se nos dañó la radio. Se os olvidaron las llaves. Se les perdió el documento.
To clarify or emphasize the person that the unexpected event happened to, you can begin with a plus the noun or a plus a prepositional pronoun. Let me show you.
A María siempre se le olvida inscribirse para votar. A mí se me cayeron todos los documentos en medio de la calle.
Well, if everything is clear, then... una llama. Eso no se ve todos los días. Hola. Para la lección de hoy, vengo desde el techo. Today, we're going to talk about the prepositions de, desde, en, entre, hasta, and sin. Let's start with the prepositions de, desde, and hasta, shall we? De is often used to mean of or belonging to, and often corresponds to the possessive endings apostrophe s and s apostrophe in English. Let's take a look at more of its uses.
Las leyes del gobierno. El hombre de 40 años. El recipiente de vidrio. La torre de atrás. La embajadora es de España. El vaso de agua.
De is also used in some idioms and adverbial phrases, like these.
De cierta manera. De nuevo. De paso. De pie. De repente. De todos modos. De vacaciones. De vuelta.
Consider the following sentence.
De repente, la jueza entró en el tribunal y todos se pusieron de pie.
Atención, de is often used in prepositional phrases of location, such as these.
Al lado de, a la derecha de, a la izquierda de, cerca de, debajo de, detrás de, encima de.
Moving along, desde can express direction, meaning from, and time, meaning since. Take a look.
La candidata viajó desde Florida hasta Alaska. No hay novedades desde el martes.
Hasta can mean as far as when talking about distance, until when talking about time, and up to when talking about quantities. Watch.
El ejército ruso avanzó hasta la frontera con Ucrania. Hasta 1898, Cuba fue una colonia de España.
Hasta can also be used as an adverb to mean even, as much or many as, or including. Watch again.
Hasta el presidente quedó sorprendido.
Atención! To express a time or distance from A to B, you can use desde, hasta, or de, a.
Hay 5 horas de Madrid a Barcelona. Fue caminando desde su casa hasta la mía.
Now let's move on to the prepositions en, entre, and sin. First, let's look at en, which corresponds to several English prepositions, such as in, on, into, onto, by, and at. Look at these sentences.
El profesor entró en la clase. Se encontraron en el museo.
En also appears in several idioms and adverbial phrases. Take a look.
En cambio, en contra de, en cuanto a, en fila. En realidad, en serio, en tren, en bicicleta, en avión, en vano.
Consider the following sentence.
En realidad, yo nunca he estado en contra de ese partido.
Entre generally corresponds to the English prepositions between and among. Watch.
Entre 2012 y 2014 tomé cursos de arte e historia, entre otros. Las cataratas del Niágara están entre Canadá y los Estados Unidos.
Atención, entre is not followed by ti or me, the pronouns that usually act as objects of prepositions. Use the subject pronouns tú and yo instead, like this.
Entre tú y yo, creo que la mayoría de las religiones comparten los mismos valores.
Lastly, we come to sin, which means without. It's often followed by a noun, but it can also be followed by a verb in the infinitive. Take a look.
Lo hice sin pensar.
Now it's time to... ¡Ay! ¡Un jaguar! En la biblioteca. ¿De dónde vino? Entre tú y yo, creo que vino desde la sección de realismo mágico. empezar. Today, I want to talk about the uses of the infinitive, or el infinitivo, in Spanish. An infinitive is the unconjugated form of a verb and ends in AR, ER, or IR. We often use the infinitive after a conjugated verb, especially where there is no change of subject. Conjugated forms of deber, decidir, desear, necesitar, pensar, poder, preferir, querer, and saber are frequently followed by an infinitive. Watch.
Después de 3 décadas de guerra, el rey decidió rendirse. No quisimos viajar a esa región durante este periodo de inestabilidad.
You may also use the infinitive after verbs of perception, such as escuchar, mirar, oír, sentir, and ver, even if there is a change of subject. Take a look.
Te oigo hablar, pero no entiendo nada.
You can use an object pronoun with the conjugated verb to distinguish the two subjects. This way, you don't need a subordinate clause. Look at this next sentence.
Si la ven salir, avísenme enseguida, por favor.
Atención! The gerund form of the verb may also be used after verbs of perception, like this.
Te escuché hablando con él.
Now, verbs of influence such as dejar, hacer, mandar, pedir, permitir, and prohibir are also often followed by the infinitive.
La profesora nos hizo leer artículos sobre la conquista.
As with verbs of perception, adding an object pronoun makes a subordinate clause unnecessary. Check out this next sentence.
El comité me ha dejado continuar con las investigaciones.
¿Quieren ver más? We can also use the infinitive with impersonal expressions such as es importante, es fácil, and es bueno.
Es importante celebrar nuestra herencia cultural.
But atención, the infinitive is required after hay que and tener que. Take a look.
Hay que hacer todo lo posible para lograr una solución pacífica.
The infinitive is also used after prepositions, like in these next sentences.
Se cree que las estatuas fueron construidas para proteger al templo. El arqueólogo las miró con cuidado sin decir nada.
You've probably noticed that many Spanish verbs follow the pattern of conjugated verb plus preposition plus infinitive, like in this next sentence.
Acabo de hablar con el profesor López.
The preposition for this pattern can be de, a, con, or en. Here are some common verbs that follow the pattern.
Acabar de, aprender a, contentarse con, dejar de. Enseñar a, quedar en, tardar en, tratar de.
Now take a look at these sentences.
Trato de estudiar todos los días. Su computadora tarda en encenderse. Quedamos en hacerlo.
I have just a few more examples to show you. While deber plus an infinitive suggests obligation, deber plus de plus an infinitive suggests probability. Let me show you what I mean.
El pueblo debe saber la verdad. El pueblo debe de saber la verdad.
Note that in Spanish, unlike in English, we cannot use the gerund form of a verb. For example, talking, working, etc., as a noun or in giving instructions. We need to use the infinitive instead. Watch.
Ver es creer. No fumar. El arte de mirar.
You can form the perfect infinitive by combining the infinitive haber and a past participle. It describes an action completed before the action of the main verb. Observe.
Después de haber terminado sus negociaciones con Austria, Napoleón regresó a París. Los mexicanos estaban orgullosos de haber conseguido la independencia de España.
Ahora ustedes van a practicar. Mientras tanto, ¿alguien me podría prestar un lápiz y una hoja? Voy a escribir una carta. ¡Ah! Lo siento. Esa película estuvo tan triste. It was all about a future in which people don't use correct grammar. But that won't happen to us, right? To make sure, let's do some reviewing. Today, I want to give you a summary of the indicative. What do you say? Use the present tense for timeless events, like this.
La gente quiere vivir en paz.
For habitual events that still happen,
Mi madre sale del trabajo a las 5.
for events that are happening right now,
Ellos están enojados.
and for future events expected to happen.
Te llamo este fin de semana.
Use the preterite tense for actions or states that begin and end at a definite point in the past, like in this example.
Ayer firmamos el contrato.
Use the imperfect tense to describe past events without a focus on beginning, end, or completeness. Look,
Yo leía mientras ella estudiaba.
or to describe habitual past actions.
Ana siempre iba a ese restaurante.
Or to describe mental, physical, and emotional states in the past.
Mi abuelo era alto y fuerte.
Use the future tense to describe future events. Observe.
Iré a Madrid en 2 semanas.
Or to express probability about the present.
¿Estará en su oficina ahora?
Use the conditional to talk about what would happen.
Él lucharía por sus ideales.
Or to describe future events in past tense. Say we consider the uses of the perfect tenses. First, there's the present perfect, to talk about what has happened.
Han cruzado la frontera.
Then there's the past perfect, to talk about what had happened.
Lo habían hablado hace tiempo.
There's also the future perfect, to talk about what will have happened.
Para la próxima semana ya se habrá estrenado la película.
And the conditional perfect, to talk about what would have happened. Watch.
Juan habría sido un gran atleta.
Atención, be sure to use the progressive forms to narrate an action in progress. First, here's the present progressive.
Emilia está estudiando historia.
And next is the imperfect progressive.
Emilia estaba estudiando historia cuando sonó el teléfono.
Then there's the preterite progressive.
Ayer Emilia estuvo estudiando historia.
And the future progressive.
Cuando regreses a casa, Emilia estará estudiando historia.
And finally, the conditional progressive. Take a look.
Si no estuviera de vacaciones, estaría estudiando historia.
Ay, yo me estoy durmiendo. Oh, ay, perdón. ¿Estaba roncando? Ay, qué vergüenza. Bienvenidos. Quiero que pongan atención porque les voy a mostrar algo muy importante. Eso no es. Aquí está. Today, I'm going to give you a summary of the subjunctive. Let's go over when to use each subjunctive verb tense. The subjunctive is mainly used in sentences with multiple clauses, like this one.
Quiero que hagas un esfuerzo.
Use the present subjunctive when the verb in the main clause is in the present indicative, like in this example you see here. You can also use the present subjunctive when the verb in the main clause is in the future tense. Observe.
Ganará las elecciones a menos que cometa algún error.
Use the past subjunctive when the verb in the main clause is in the past.
Esperaba que vinieras.
Also use the past subjunctive in hypothetical statements about the present. Let me show you what I mean.
Si tuviéramos boletos, iríamos al concierto.
The present perfect subjunctive is used when the verb in the main clause is in the present, but the verb in the subordinate clause is in the past, like in this next example.
Es horrible que te hayan despedido de tu trabajo.
The past perfect subjunctive is used when the main clause is in the past and the subordinate clause refers to an action that occurred even earlier. Watch again.
Me molestó que mi madre me hubiera despertado tan temprano.
The past perfect subjunctive is also used for hypothetical statements about the past.
Si me hubieras llamado, habría salido contigo anoche.
Okay, to wrap up the discussion on the uses of the subjunctive, here's one more example of each subjunctive tense.
Es importante que estudiemos nuestra propia historia. Los indígenas querían que los conquistadores abandonaran sus tierras. Es increíble que el arqueólogo haya descubierto tantas ruinas. Cristóbal Colón no hubiera llegado a América sin el apoyo de la reina.
Now, before we finish, let's contrast the uses of the subjunctive with the uses of the indicative or the infinitive. Use the subjunctive after expressions of will and influence when there are two different subjects, like this.
Ellos quieren que tú vuelvas temprano.
Use the infinitive after expressions of will and influence when there's only one subject.
Ellos quieren volver temprano.
Use the subjunctive after expressions of emotion when there are two different subjects. Watch.
La profesora temía que sus estudiantes no aprobaran el examen.
Use the infinitive after expressions of emotion when there's only one subject. Watch again.
Los estudiantes temían no aprobar el examen.
Use the subjunctive after expressions of doubt, disbelief, or denial when there are two different subjects. Take a look.
Es imposible que Javier haya salido por esa puerta.
Use the infinitive after expressions of doubt, disbelief, or denial when there's only one subject.
Es imposible salir por esa puerta. Siempre está cerrada.
Use the subjunctive when the person or thing in the main clause is uncertain or indefinite. Observe.
Buscan un empleado que haya estudiado administración de empresas.
Use the indicative when the person or thing in the main clause is certain or definite.
Contrataron a un empleado que estudió administración de empresas.
Atención! Impersonal expressions of will, emotion, or uncertainty are followed by the subjunctive unless there is no change of subject. Compare these two sentences.
Es terrible que tú te enfermes. Es terrible enfermarse.
Use the subjunctive after a menos que, antes de que, con tal de que, en caso de que, para que, and sin que. Take a look.
El abogado hizo todo lo posible para que su cliente no fuera a la cárcel.
Use the infinitive after a menos de, antes de, con tal de, en caso de, para, and sin when there is no change in subject. Look again.
El abogado hizo todo lo posible para defender a su cliente.
Use the subjunctive after the conjunctions cuando, después de que, en cuanto, hasta que, and tan pronto como when they refer to future actions. Observe.
Compraré otro teléfono celular cuando me ofrezcan un plan adecuado a mis necesidades.
Use the indicative after the conjunctions cuando, después de que, en cuanto, hasta que, and tan pronto como when they don't refer to future actions.
Compré otro teléfono celular en cuanto me ofrecieron un plan adecuado a mis necesidades.
Use the subjunctive after see in hypothetical or contrary to fact statements about the present, like this one.
Si tuviera tiempo, iría al cine.
Use the indicative after see in hypothetical statements about possible or probable future events, like this.
Si tengo tiempo, iré al cine.
Use the subjunctive after see in hypothetical or contrary to fact statements about the past. For example,
Si hubiera tenido tiempo, habría ido al cine.
use the indicative after see in statements that express habitual past actions. For example,
Si tenía tiempo, siempre iba al cine.
so now it's time for Eva Perón. Es bueno que haya venido, doña Evita, pero sería mejor si usted volviera dentro de 5 minutos. Por favor.
Finish.